Fellow Nigerians, we are living in very trying and troubling times. This little contribution is not about Nigerian politics. It's not about what's happening here alone, but it's about something that will ultimately affect us in a very dramatic way. What is unfolding in the Ukraine is deeply disturbing. But more disturbing is the fact that most Nigerians, most Africans, indeed most people in the world, have not heard the other side of the story from the Russian perspective. There are always two sides to a story. If you go to court and hear just one side, and you don't hear the other, you can never administer justice. If you go and listen to what one person says and don't listen to the person that they are referring to has to say about a matter, you will never achieve justice. What is unfolding in the Ukraine, in the West, between Russia and NATO, something that may well end up as a third world war if we are not careful. First of all, you must appreciate the fact that Russia was encircled by NATO, literally, encircled by enemies. You must also appreciate the fact that they felt that it was unacceptable for the Ukraine to move too close to the West and even to contemplate the idea of having membership of NATO. The minute that happened, that is something that the Russians were bound to react to. And it was getting close to that. Imagine a situation whereby the Russian Federation had nuclear weapons and had a nuclear pact with Canada on the northern borders of America, or had a pact, military pact and nuclear weapons in Mexico on the southern border of America. Of course, that would be unacceptable to the Americans. Or for example, if Cuba had the same, the Americans would react in a very dramatic and forceful manner. And nobody would blame them for being forceful in the defense of their own motherland, and also to ensure that they are not able to be wiped off the face of the earth at one stroke because there's a nuclear power right next to them. That is the perspective of the Russians. There's another aspect that a lot of people don't know. Most of eastern Ukraine are peopled by Russian-speaking individuals who want to be part and parcel of the Russian Federation. Remember, there was one country before. They have separatist movements there that are fighting to leave Ukraine and be part of Russia. And rather like some people in this country believe that Biafra should break off from Nigeria, they have exercised their right of self-determination, say they want to be part of Russia, and they were being slaughtered by the Ukrainian forces, something that the West and the rest of Ukraine turned a blind eye to. You don't see that on CNN. They were being slaughtered on a daily basis. And the Russian Federation felt they needed to go in to protect those people and deliver them. So they took the Crimea, which was traditionally part of Russia a few years back. Now, after taking the Crimea a few years back, they now focused on Donetsk, which is another region, and one other region, I've forgotten the name now, in eastern Ukraine. And a few days ago, they marched in and literally occupied the place and saved the people that were being slaughtered there from the Ukrainian forces. And then they had to go a step further. And why did they have to do that? They felt threatened by the fact that the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian government were too close to the West and were about to join NATO, or refused to say that they would never join NATO. And the greatest fear of the Russians is for a country on their direct border to join NATO. That would result in catastrophic things going on. And they didn't want that. So what they've done, they've gone in, and unfortunately, they have invaded. And I have no doubt that they will remove the president. They will put another president there who will guarantee the fact that the Ukraine will never join NATO and will continue to be almost like a buffer state between the Western powers, Western Europe, and Russia. That is the only way that the Russians will feel comfortable. Now, look at the other side. NATO has built up so many armaments and so much arms and nuclear bases all over Europe, right on the doorstep of Russia. The only ally that Russia has is Belarus, and of course the Chinese, and of course the Indians, who have refused to condemn what they're doing and has vetoed any acts against Russia at the Security Council, which I'm quite pleased about. Now, I'm not saying that I'm pro-Russia, I'm anti-Ukraine, or I'm anti-NATO. All I'm saying is that there is more than one side to this story. And we in this country have to stop relying on the BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera to churn out what they are making you believe is the truth. It's not the truth. There's more than one side to the story. There's a different perspective, and there must be understanding, and you must have an informed opinion form whatever it is that you believe to be, your position based on informed facts, not on what CNN tells you or what they want you to believe. Now, there's another aspect to all this, which is very disturbing. Why is it that Poland and all the other European countries are barring fleeing refugees from the Ukraine to enter their borders? And why is it that the Ukrainian police are not allowing Africans? They are removing Africans from the free trains that they've provided for nationals of other countries, including India, Ukrainians themselves, people from all over the world to flee the Ukraine. They're providing transport for them, but they're removing Africans from those trains. And the European countries are blocking Africans from entering. You don't get much reportage on that on CNN or on BBC. I give credit to BBC, they reported it once earlier today, but outside of that, CNN doesn't mention. This is racism and it's unacceptable. And the most important thing is to appreciate the fact that the bottom line is that the white people in the Ukraine are entitled to flee and run away from Russian bombs, and they're entitled to enter Europe. But the black people, African students in Ukraine, are being barred from doing so by the Ukrainians themselves and also by the European countries. Now, what does that tell you about the mindset of these people? Putin said something. He has described the Ukrainian government as basically fascists, right-wing nationalists and fascists who are essentially racist in character. I would have to say that I agree with that. But having said that, I do condemn the fact that civilians are being killed. This is unacceptable and this is wrong. And I call for peace on all sides. Peace, restraint, and understanding. But we in the rest of the world must understand that this clash and this conflict will ultimately affect us all, and I'll tell you why. It will affect us because, as I said earlier, ultimately there will be a clash between Russia on the one hand, backed by China and perhaps India and a few other very powerful countries in the world. And by the way, China and India also have massive nuclear arsenals. But on the one hand, you will have Russia backed by China, perhaps India, one or two others. And on the other hand, you will have NATO in its full force and, backed by America. And, these are two very, very powerful sides. And what's going to happen? And it's being planned, it's being orchestrated. Just like Joseph Okechukwu has said, great writer and commentator of Nigerian stock, great guy. He analyzed it very, very well. I'd urge you to go and watch his videos. What's happening has been planned from years and years ago. It's going to happen. It's being provoked. The Russians are being provoked into this. And what's going to ultimately happen is that there will be a clash. The likelihood is that ultimately the Europeans and NATO will end up, in a military conflict. But there will be something on the border, there'll be a miscalculation, there'll be a skirmish. Russian troops will end up tangling with NATO forces somewhere along the western border of the Ukraine. This is after the occupation has been completed. There's going to be some form of military action between the two. Now, when that happens and NATO comes together to face the Russians, it'll be an overwhelming force. It'll be difficult for the Russians to contain them. And Putin has said something. He has said, we anticipate this, that when they come against us, the might of NATO all together combined against us will be too strong for us. We'll take them on, but they'll be very, very strong, difficult to handle. And what we will then do is fall back on our nuclear arsenal. Now, what's that telling you? He's telling the world that if you try us, if you push us in the Ukraine or anywhere else, or if you allow Finland or Sweden to join NATO, or if you press us on the Ukraine and try to liberate the Ukrainians, or try to come in or interfere with us in any way, that we will ultimately fight you with, military tactics and ordinary armaments, conventional forces and conventional armaments. But if we are pushed to it and you appear to be defeating us, which you may well be able to, we will resort to nuclear weapons. Russia has the second largest stock of nuclear weapons on planet Earth, second only to the Americans. And of course, China, that's what's watching and is clearly behind Russia, has the third largest. How does this is going to affect the whole world, the entire world, including Africa. So we need to pray, like Joe Okechukwu keeps saying. We need to pray, we need to be informed, we need to be sensitive, and we need to understand that this thing that's unfolding is a very sad one. Sadly, it is also prophetic, and by God's grace, he will deliver us from this terrible, terrible conflict that is about to be foisted on the world. What I've outlined here may not happen immediately. It's what you call a totalitarian tiptoe, as David Icke would say. It's step by step, well calculated, but it's going to happen. And this will lead to the Third World War. It doesn't mean it'll lead to the end of the world, but it'll lead to the Third World War. Now, we pray against this. I hope I'm wrong. But our position as Nigerians and Africans is to be informed, to be prayerful, and to pray that we are not affected in a way that, you know, is something that we can never recover from. That's my prayer for this country. And I suggest we focus on things like that rather than constantly looking within and criticizing one another and insulting one another and talking about things that are essentially irrelevant, because right now we are fighting for the survival of humanity from a very, very evil force that wants to plunge the world into a Third World War. Now let me end with this. I deplore the killing and the slaughter of civilians. I want to be very clear on that. And my heart goes out to what the Ukrainian people are suffering today. They're being bombed left, right, and center. They're being driven from their cities. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are pouring over the borders into Europe. They've been thoroughly destabilized. They're being humiliated, and they're being stripped bare. But it was predictable and it was avoidable. President Zelensky made a fundamental mistake. He played into the hands of the West. He allowed them to use him as a puppet. They pushed him over the brink, caused him to provoke Russia. Russia attacked, and now they've left him all on his own. What is happening there? The blame has to be fully and squarely on the shoulders of the president. 1 month ago, I predicted this would happen, and I posted it. And I warned, and I sent a warning to Zelensky and the Ukrainians that they needed to do what? Get sense, as the Nigerians would say. Well, they didn't get the sense. Now, the West has now left them. NATO has now left them. They are all on their own. Their cities are being bombed. Their people are being killed. They're being pauperized. They're being tortured. They're being bombed to smithereens by the Russians. And nobody's there to help them other than to say, oh, sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. Yes, of course, they'll impose sanctions. But this is the first chapter of a very long book, because it'll get a lot worse. And when the real conflict starts, Ukraine will be on the front line of battle. And that is where the tragedy will really be made manifest. When nuclear bombs are thrown over European cities, Eastern cities, Russian cities, American cities, and when they touch Africa as well, and there's a major conflict here, that is when people will appreciate the fact that when I said Zelensky needed to get sense and not be used by the West to goad Russia and provoke her into doing what she's doing today, that I was absolutely right. Well, let's keep praying. We pray for Ukraine, we pray for Russia, we pray for America, we pray for NATO, we pray for everybody.